time I took the overnight shift at Wexley University, I had started treating New Year's Eve like a test. Not a celebration, not a reset. A test. Could I sit through midnight without something trying to get in? Could I make it from one year to the next without the world reminding me that doors are suggestions and silence is never empty? That's the headspace I was in when my supervisor texted me late that afternoon and asked if I could cover the night watch at the maintenance building. The guy who'd been scheduled called out last minute. Family emergency, the text said, like those words automatically made everything reasonable. It was holiday pay. It was mostly sitting in a break room listening to a radio and doing one quick snowplow pass around midnight so the staff lot wouldn't turn into an ice rink by morning. And selfishly, it sounded like the kind of lonely shift where nothing could surprise you. Lights on, doors locked, campus empty, a job with rules. I said yes before I could think too hard about it. Wexley is the kind of small college tucked into the hills of northern Maine where winter doesn't arrive. It settles in and refuses to leave. The buildings are old stone and brick, the sidewalks are always half buried, and the wind has a way of finding every gap in your clothes. During the semester, it's busy in a contained academic way. During winter break, it becomes a ghost town with working heat. That night, snow had been falling since morning. Not a blizzard, just steady, patient snowfall. The kind that makes everything look clean while it quietly erases the world you're used to. By the time I parked at the maintenance building around 7:30, the lot was already filling in again. My tire tracks softening behind me like the ground was trying to forget I was there. The maintenance building sat on the back edge of campus, away from the main quad, surrounded by trees and a line of garages. It wasn't creepy in daylight. It was practical. But at night, with the campus lights dimmed and the snow muffling sound, it felt like being stationed at the edge of a map. Inside, the break room smelled like old coffee and industrial soap. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A dry erase board on the wall had a permanent stain of half-erased messages. Inventory due, plow blades, and for reasons that made no sense, do not move my coffee mugs, written in angry block letters like it had been there since before I was hired. I put my bag down, hung my coat, and tried to make the shift feel normal. I microwaved a vending machine sandwich that tasted like salt and regret. I poured coffee into a chipped mug. I scrolled mindlessly on my phone, watching videos with the sound off because the quiet was already loud enough. At some point, I stood at the dry erase board and wrote a list in the corner, more for myself than anyone else. Keep your head, stay kind, leave when it's time. It wasn't exactly a New Year's resolution list, more like reminders. The kind you write when you're trying to anchor yourself. I also had this cheap little handheld weather barometer in my pocket. One of those novelty things my uncle gave me years ago. It wasn't accurate enough to be useful, but it gave you a general sense of pressure changes. Normally, it sat in my drawer collecting dust. That night, I carried it like a charm. By 11, everything was calm. The radio was silent, the campus was silent, the building settled and creaked the way old structures do when the temperature drops, like it was stretching in its sleep. Outside the windows, snow fell in slow sheets under the security lights. At 11:45, I got up and started layering on my gear, hat, gloves, coat. I clipped the keys for the plow to my belt loop. The plow itself lived in a separate garage behind the main maintenance building, a compact utility truck with a front blade. Nothing fancy, but strong enough to push a single lane clear if you didn't let the snow build up too much. The plan was simple. Walk out, open the garage, start the plow, do a quick loop around the staff lot, park it again, go back inside, finish the shift, collect my holiday pay, and pretend New Year's was just another night. I stepped out the back door and the cold hit me like it had been waiting. It wasn't just low temperature, it was sharp, dry cold that makes your nostrils sting and your lungs feel smaller. The snow under my boots was fresh enough to squeak. The path to the garage had been shoveled earlier, but it was filling in again. The edges soft and rounding like the snow was trying to tuck the world back under a blanket. The garage door was a roll-up metal slab with a keypad mounted beside it. 4-digit code, simple. The light over the keypad glowed faintly orange through a crust of frost. I wiped the frost away with my sleeve and typed the code. Nothing. No green light, no beep, no click. I tried again, slower. Still nothing. Come on, I muttered, and it sounded too loud outside. On the third attempt, the keypad finally made a soft chirp, and the motor overhead tried to engage. The door shuddered like it wanted to rise, then stalled with a tired buzzing noise like a machine choking on ice. I exhaled, annoyed. This wasn't paranormal, this was winter, this was why maintenance existed. I grabbed the bottom edge of the door with gloved hands and pulled. The metal groaned, but it moved. I lifted it just enough to duck under and slip inside. Instant blackness. I reached for the light switch near the entrance and flicked it. Nothing. No hum, no fluorescent flicker. Dead. That should have been my cue to leave, to go back inside and call it in. But I was tired, and tired makes you stubborn. Also, I told myself it's a garage. The main building still has power, probably a breaker, probably just the storm. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam lit up a narrow cone of dusty air. The plow sat exactly where it should have been, facing outward, blade lowered, parked like an obedient animal waiting for its handler. Tools lined the walls. Shelving units stacked with salt bags and spare parts loomed in the edges of the light. The air inside smelled like gasoline, rubber, and something faintly metallic. Rust, chains, old oil. I climbed into the cab of the plow, closed the door, and shoved the key into the ignition. I turned it. The engine gave a dry cough. Then nothing, no click, no dash lights, no battery whine, just dead silence like the truck was a statue. I tried again, listening harder as if my attention could coax it into life. Same result. Silence so heavy it felt like it had weight. A flicker of irritation went through me. Battery could be drained from cold. It happened. But the plow had been used that afternoon. It shouldn't have been dead. I sat there for a second, phone light shaking slightly in my hand, and that's when my barometer buzzed faintly in my pocket. Not a notification buzz, just the tiny vibration it made when the pressure dropped fast. I pulled it out and looked. The needle had swung lower than I'd ever seen it, like the air outside had suddenly changed its mind about being breathable. That was when I noticed something in the side mirror, a movement that didn't belong. At first it was just a blur near the garage door opening. I turned off my phone light instinctively, as if darkness could hide me better than a beam could reveal me. Then I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. Outside, in the gap under the partially raised door, I could make out boots. Not the whole person. Just boots pacing slowly back and forth in the snow right in front of the entrance. The steps were measured, not hurried, like someone had all the time in the world. My mouth went dry. My hands went damp inside my gloves. Nobody was scheduled to be here. All other facility staff had clocked out by 6. Security stayed near the front gate, almost half a mile away. Students were mostly gone for break. The campus had that winter break emptiness where you can shout into the quad and hear your own voice come back. I held my breath and listened. No talking, no radio chatter, no crunch of someone approaching because they didn't need to approach. They were already right there. Then I heard the keypad, a soft beep beep, followed by a longer error tone. They were trying to enter the code. My throat tightened. I slid down in the seat, shrinking as low as I could, and in the process, my phone buzzed hard in my pocket. The vibration felt like a siren in the silence. I froze with my hand hovering over my pocket, terrified that even that tiny electronic hum had announced me. Outside, the keypad beeped again. Another attempt. Another error tone. Then the motor overhead kicked in, that same choking engagement as before. The door shuddered upward a few inches more. A shadow fell across the snow. I pressed myself farther down, heart hammering. The door lifted again, slowly, unevenly, like someone was helping it. And then gloved hands appeared beneath the opening, fingers curling under the metal edge. Whoever it was wasn't waiting for the motor to do the work. They were pulling the door up by hand. The opening widened to shoulder height and a figure ducked inside. Male, average build, snow parka with a thick hood, flashlight in his hand. He didn't call out. He didn't announce himself like a security officer would. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who wasn't worried about being questioned. His flashlight beam swept the garage, slow and methodical, as if he was checking items off a mental list. The beam moved across the plow, across the shelving, across the walls. He passed within a few feet of the cab. I held my breath so hard my chest ached. He didn't look up into the plow. He didn't try the door. He didn't react to the truck being dead, which should have been the first thing someone noticed if they were here for the plow. Instead, he walked past it like it didn't exist, straight to the back wall. There, he paused, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out something thin and shiny, wire, maybe more than one. It caught the flashlight beam and glinted like fishing line. Then he crouched near a large generator housing mounted along the back wall, the kind we used as backup power for some of the garage systems. His flashlight angled downward, blocked by his body, and in that moment everything in me went cold and clear. He wasn't exploring, he was setting something up. I don't know how I knew that. I just did. The way his shoulders squared, the way his hands moved with familiarity, the way he didn't hurry like he expected no one to interrupt him. I didn't wait for my brain to come up with possibilities. I didn't wait for confirmation. I didn't wait to see what he was doing. I moved. I shoved the cab door open, and the cold air slapped me as I dropped to the garage floor. My boots hit concrete with a thud. The sound felt huge. The intruder snapped his head slightly, reacting to the noise. I ran. I sprinted for the half-open garage door, ducked under the metal edge, and burst into the snow so fast I nearly fell. My lungs burned. The air outside felt sharper than knives. Behind me, I heard movement, a scrape, a quick step, but I didn't look back. I ran across the back lot toward the maintenance building, feet slipping slightly on the fresh powder. My keys clanked against my belt. My gloves felt too bulky, my coat too heavy, like everything on me was designed to slow me down. I hit the back door of the maintenance building and yanked, locked. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled for my key card with numb fingers and slapped it against the reader. A red light blinked. For a split second, panic slammed into me so hard I almost stopped thinking. Then the reader beeped green and the lock clicked. I shoved the door open and stumbled inside, slamming it behind me and turning the deadbolt with shaking hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like nothing had happened. The break room TV was still playing, some late-night recap show with people laughing too loudly. Normal again, like it was mocking me. I ran to the radio and grabbed it, my fingers fumbling with the dial. Static. I pressed the talk button. "This is facilities, backlot," I said, voice too high. "I need campus security. Someone is in the plow garage." Silence. No response, not even a crackle. I pressed again, harder, like force could make it work. "Security, respond." Still nothing. I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe. The backup landline, I remembered. Second floor office. Old beige phone mounted by the breaker panel. I bolted up the back stairwell, shoes squeaking on the steps, and reached the office door. It was locked, but I had the key. My hands shook so badly it took 2 tries to fit it into the lock. Inside, the air was colder, like the office didn't get as much heat. I flipped the light on. It worked, bright and harsh. The landline sat on the wall, cord coiled like a sleeping snake. I grabbed it, lifted the receiver, and before I could dial, my phone buzzed again in my pocket. This time I looked. One unread message in the maintenance group chat, sent at 11:40 p.m. "Heads up, garage code changed. Don't use backlot tonight. Power got cut again. Be alert." I stared at the screen until the words turned into shapes. 11:40, 15 minutes before I walked out to the garage. The same time the intruder had tried the keypad. The same time the radio had gone dead. The message was a warning, and I had missed it because I'd been trying too hard to treat the night like it was normal. My throat tightened, not just from fear, but from that sick kind of realization that makes you feel late to your own life. I dialed security on the landline with shaking fingers and got through immediately. They told me to stay put and lock the office door. So I did. I turned off the office light because light makes you visible and crawled down to sit on the floor with my back against a filing cabinet. I held my phone in both hands, screen dimmed, listening to the building's hum. From outside, I couldn't hear the garage, I couldn't hear footsteps, I couldn't hear the door. I heard nothing at all, and that silence felt worse than noise because it meant I had no proof of where he was. Minutes crawled. Midnight passed somewhere without me seeing it. No fireworks, no countdown. Just the second hand of my watch moving like it didn't care what night it was. At some point, the barometer in my pocket buzzed again. A small, angry vibration, and then it settled. The needle slowly crawling back toward normal like the air had relaxed. Just after sunrise, 2 campus officers arrived. They escorted me down to the garage with cautious professionalism, flashlights in hand, even though the sky was light enough to see. The back lot was a blank sheet of snow. No footprints except mine from when I'd run back to the building. No scuffs, no drag marks, no signs of anyone else walking to or from the garage. The garage door was fully closed, as if it had never been lifted at all. They opened it with the new code, and we stepped inside. The lights still didn't work. The air still smelled like gas and metal. The plow sat where it had been, dead. One officer popped the hood and checked the battery. "Totally shot," he said. "Like it's been dead a while." "That's impossible," I whispered, more to myself than to him. They walked the perimeter, checking shelves, looking for stolen items, looking for anything. There was no forced entry, no broken lock, no missing tools. The garage looked untouched. Then we went to the back wall, where I had seen the man crouched. The officers shone their flashlights over the generator housing and the bolts and the conduit. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined the wire. I thought maybe fear had written a story onto shadows. And then one officer said, "What's that?" On the concrete near the base of the generator housing lay a pair of stiff gloves, dark and wet, like they'd been dropped in a hurry. Next to them, looped around a bolt, was a thin wire, 6 inches maybe, twisted neatly, not tangled, not accidental. The wire looked like it had been placed there on purpose. The officers bagged the gloves in the wire, asked me the same questions you'd expect. Did I recognize him? Did I hear a vehicle? Did I have any enemies? And I answered no to all of them because the truth was worse than having a suspect. Then they checked the cameras. Outdoor feeds were fine. You could see the snow falling, the empty campus, my own car arriving, my own footprints later. But the camera aimed at the break room door, the one that would have shown me leaving for the garage and possibly someone watching, had a gap. Exactly 20 minutes missing. From 11:40 p.m. to midnight, no static, no glitch footage, no corrupted fragments. Just a clean absence, like the camera blinked and forgot it had eyes. Nobody ever figured out who that man was. They checked local records. They questioned a couple of seasonal workers. They asked security if anyone had authorized a change of code. The answer was vague. We had an issue earlier. We updated it. No one could say why I wasn't told directly, or why the message hit the group chat so late, or why the only camera that mattered lost exactly the time window when someone tried to get in. On paper, it became a minor incident. Attempted unauthorized entry, well, no losses. Something that got filed and forgotten. But I didn't forget what it felt like to watch gloved hands lift a door like it weighed nothing. I didn't forget that he walked past the plow like it wasn't his target. And I didn't forget the moment my phone buzzed with that warning and I realized the scariest part wasn't that someone came in. It was that someone came in at a time that made it feel planned. That morning when I finally got home, I stood in my apartment and looked at my shoes by the door the way you look at something that might be taken away. I thought about how many times I'd avoided being rude to my instincts. How many times I'd stayed in a situation because leaving felt dramatic. Then I remembered the list I'd written on the dry erase board in the break room. Keep your head, stay kind, leave when it's time. I had left when it was time. That's not a victory you celebrate with fireworks, but it's the kind that keeps you alive. And ever since that New Year's Eve, I don't ignore warnings, even the ones that come late, especially the ones that come late. Because sometimes the only difference between a scary story and an obituary is whether you decide to run before you understand why you're running. The first time I saw black electrical tape wrapped around a breaker switch, my brain tried to treat it like a harmless mistake, like someone cleaning staff, a rushed contractor, a tired employee, had done something sloppy and temporary. Like the tape was there to keep the lights off during a repair, like it meant nothing. But there's a difference between off and held down. Tape isn't an accident, tape is intention. And on New Year's Eve in the Vermont woods, I learned that sometimes people don't tape things off to fix them. Sometimes they tape things off to keep them from coming back on. I was working night maintenance at a cabin rental property tucked behind a series of winding back roads. 7 cabins spread out just far enough that guests felt alone without actually being alone. It was the kind of place couples rented when they wanted to pretend the world didn't exist for a weekend. Boston and New York plates were common in the lot. People arrived with overpriced wine and big plans for quiet. They left with photos and the smug look of people who survived nature without losing cell service. Most nights, the job was repetitive. Walk the grounds every couple of hours, check the older heaters, clear the main walkway. Answer calls about fireplaces and flickering lights and a noise in the wall. You'd be surprised how many grown adults become helpless the minute they're 20 minutes away from a hardware store. Normally, I was off for New Year's, and I loved that. I'd heat up leftovers, watch garbage TV, and let midnight slide by unnoticed. But the guy who usually handled night rounds, Bryce, decided to pre-game too hard the night before and vanished. No call, no apology. Just gone. The owner was the kind of man who treated everything like a spreadsheet problem, including people. He texted me at noon on the 31st. Need you tonight. Extra pay. Easy shift. I didn't want to be alone at midnight. Not after everything I'd been through, but I also didn't want to sit in an apartment staring at a door and imagining knocks. So I said yes. It was snowing when I arrived. The kind of soft, steady snowfall that makes the world look gentle while it quietly takes away your depth perception. The property's main office was a converted garage. Tiny desk, space heater, a coffee maker that tasted faintly like plastic, and a grid of security monitors showing cabin porches and the main paths. 4 cabins were booked that night. The rest were empty, dark, and locked. At 7, couples started lighting fireplaces. At 8, the first calls came in. Our pilot light won't stay on. The thermostat says 70, but it feels like 50. Can you recommend a pizza place that delivers out here? By 10, everything settled. Guests were inside. The snow had thickened. The woods pressed closer, swallowing the property in the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're standing inside a closed fist. I did my first round, checking the heat pumps on the older cabins, kicking snow off the steps, making sure the paths were still visible. Every cabin looked warm and normal. Yellow light in windows, silhouettes moving inside, a flicker of TV glow. People laughing in the muffled way you laugh when you've had a few drinks and you're trying to make the night feel special. Cabin 4 called around 10:30. The desk phone rang, and when I answered, a woman's voice came through, tired, not panicked, like she was annoyed at the inconvenience more than afraid. "Hi," she said. "This is Tessa in cabin 4. The lights in the back half of the cabin were flickering earlier. They stopped, but it felt weird. I asked the usual questions. Any smell, any popping, any outlets warm? No, she said, it's New Year's Eve. I don't want something catching fire. That made sense. I told her I'd come look. Cabin 4 was one of the older units set farther back close to the tree line. It had a cozy, staged winter vibe. Log walls, a little porch swing, a fireplace that made everything look romantic even when the rest of the room was cold. When I knocked, Tessa opened the door with a tight smile. Behind her, her husband, Grant, sat on the couch hunched over his phone like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He didn't look up when I came in. He didn't even pretend to care. Tessa apologized like she was inconveniencing me, which always made me feel protective. "I know it's late," she said. My gut didn't like it." "I'm glad you called," I told her, and I meant it. "Let me check the breaker panel." The breaker box was in a closet near the back bedroom. When I opened it, I expected to see a loose switch, maybe one that had half tripped. Old cabins do that. Temperature changes, moisture, wiring that's been patched too many times. Instead, I saw tape. Black electrical tape wrapped thickly around one breaker switch, holding it in the off position like a restraint. Not a quick strip. Several clean wraps, tight enough that you'd have to peel it deliberately. I stared at it for a moment too long. Tessa stepped in behind me. "What is that?" she asked, and something in her voice shifted from annoyed to wary. I peeled the tape slowly, feeling the sticky resistance. The switch underneath was fully off. "Did you or your husband tape this?" I asked. even though the question felt stupid the second I said it. Tessa's face changed. She didn't just look confused, she looked insulted, like the suggestion was offensive. "No," she said quickly. "We haven't touched anything. We barely know where the light switches are." I glanced at Grant out in the living room. He still hadn't moved. I forced a calm tone. "Sometimes cleaning staff tape things if there's an outlet they don't want guests using," I said. It was a lie dressed up as a possibility, the kind you offer to keep people from spiraling. Or maintenance could have been testing something earlier. Tessa didn't look convinced. I wasn't either. I flipped the breaker back on. The cabin lights held steady. No flicker, no surge. "Okay," I said, as if that settled it. "If it happens again, call right away. I'll log this and have it checked tomorrow." Tessa thanked me too many times. Grant finally looked up just long enough to give a small nod that felt like he was nodding at the concept of me, not at me. As I left, I glanced back at the breaker box. The tape sat in my hand like a dead insect. I threw it away in the outside trash bin and told myself it was probably just a weird oversight. Probably. Back at the office, I opened the maintenance log app on my phone and recorded the call. The app was a simple property tool, time-stamped notes, cabin numbers, quick checklists. I typed, "Cabin 4, report flicker, found breaker taped off. Remove tape, reset breaker, advise follow-up." The app froze for a second as I hit save, then it saved with the wrong time. It stamped the entry as 11:56 p.m. I frowned and checked my phone clock, 10:47. I deleted the entry and retyped it. Same thing, 11:56. I told myself the app was glitchy. Rural data, bad connection. I closed it and tried to let it go. The problem with New Year's Eve is that the night is full of almost midnight moments. People are counting down long before midnight arrives. Everything feels like it's leaning towards something. At 11:20, the wind picked up and fog rolled in so thick it made the security lights look like underwater lanterns. My office windows fogged slightly from the heater, and the camera monitors became even more important because visibility outside dropped to almost nothing. I did a quick scan of the feeds. Cabin 1, couple dancing in the kitchen. Cabin 2, TV glow, someone moving near the couch. Cabin 3, dark, empty. Cabin 4, porch light on, window glow. Cabin 5 and 6, empty. Cabin 7, empty. Cabin 7 had been empty for weeks. No guests, no cleaners, no maintenance. The owner had mentioned renovations at some point, but nothing ever happened. It just sat there dark, like a house holding its breath. At 11:56, the motion sensor on Cabin 7 triggered. On the monitor, the porch camera blinked a red indicator. The feed automatically rewound 10 seconds the way the system always did when motion was detected. I leaned closer. A figure walked into frame. Big coat, fur-trimmed hood. It moved up the steps slow and steady and stopped directly in front of the door. No knock, no turning of the handle, just standing there facing the cabin like it was waiting for something to recognize it. My mouth went dry. Then the screen cut out. Not the whole system, just that camera. 4 seconds of black. When it returned, the porch was empty. I stared at the feed, waiting for the figure to reappear from a different angle, to walk off the porch, to leave footprints. But the camera showed nothing. Snow drifted softly in front of the lens. The porch rail was dusted in white. It looked untouched. I rewound again. Same thing. Figure arrives at 11:56, cut, empty porch. I checked the timestamp in the corner of the monitor. 11:56, the same wrong time the log app kept assigning to my Cabin 4 note. A cold little thought formed in the back of my mind. What if the system wasn't glitching? What if something about this property was stuck at 11:56 like a needle on a record? Policy was clear. If a motion sensor triggers on an empty cabin, you check it. Liability, trespassers, safety. It was the kind of rule that assumes the problem is a person you can scare off with a flashlight. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in me said stay in the office with locked doors and monitors. But I also didn't want to be the guy who ignored a potential intruder and woke up tomorrow to a smashed window and angry owners. So I grabbed my radio, wrote a quick note on the desk, checking cabin 7 sensor, and headed out in the utility cart. The drive to cabin 7 was short but miserable in that fog. Headlights didn't cut through it, they just made it brighter. The path was uneven with packed snow, and the cart bumped and skidded like it didn't trust the ground beneath it. When I reached cabin 7, the porch was dark. The windows were black, no footprints. That's what hit me first. The snow on the steps was pristine, no compressed marks, no disturbed powder, nothing to suggest anyone had walked up there in the last hour, let alone the last minute. I climbed out, boots crunching loudly, and walked up to the porch. The boards creaked under my weight. The door was locked. The handle was cold enough to sting through my glove. I shone my flashlight along the railing under the porch swing. Behind the pillar. Nothing. I stood there, fog swirling around the beam of my light, and felt a creeping irritation. The feed must have glitched. The sensor must have misfired. The whole thing was probably just a software hiccup. I turned back toward the cart. That's when my radio crackled. At first I thought it was static. The property radios were old and temperamental. They'd pick up weird interference sometimes, especially in bad weather. But this wasn't static. It was breathing. Slow, rhythmic inhales and exhales coming through the speaker, filtered and steady like someone was holding the mic to their mouth without speaking. I stopped walking. The breath continued. I lifted the radio closer to my ear, and for a split second I wondered if it was my own breathing echoing somehow. If the radio was picking up the sound of my coat collar and feeding it back. Then the breathing changed, slightly deeper, slower, like it was responding to my attention. I pressed the talk button. "This is maintenance," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Who's on my channel?" No answer, just breathing. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight sweeping fog, trees, cabin corners. The forest was close here. The tree line felt like a wall just beyond the glow of my beam. The breathing went on, patient as a metronome. I turned the radio volume down until it clicked silent and walked back to the cart without running. Running would have made me feel like prey. I wanted to leave like I belonged on that path, like I wasn't scared. I got back to the office and turned the camera grid up brighter. Cabin 7 feed was normal again. Empty porch. Snow falling. I told myself I was done. No more checks. Midnight was coming and the guests were inside. The job now was to sit and wait. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Cabin 4's feed was down. Not fuzzy, not snowed over, down. Black screen. It had been working 20 minutes earlier. I tried switching channels, restarting the monitor. No change. I reached for the landline and called cabin 4. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. My mind flicked back to Tessa's voice. My gut didn't like it. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out again, this time on foot. The utility cart felt too slow. I wanted to control my movement. Cabin 4's porch light was on. The windows glowed warm. From the outside, it looked normal enough that for a moment I felt foolish. I could even see Grant on the couch through the front window, hunched in the same position, face lit by his phone. I knocked. No response. I knocked again, harder, and the sound echoed strangely, swallowed by fog. Still nothing. The door wasn't locked. I didn't realize that until my hand touched the handle and it gave slightly, like the cabin had been waiting for someone to test it. The thought hit me like a slap. I'm about to walk into someone else's problem. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Cold hit me immediately. Not the heat's low cold. Not the fireplace died out cold. This was colder inside than outside. A dry, sharp cold that made my nostrils sting like the air had been sitting untouched for hours. My flashlight beam cut across the living room, and Grant was there on the couch exactly where he'd been earlier, shoulders slumped, phone in hand. He didn't look up. "Tessa?" I called. A small sound came from the kitchen, like someone shifting weight. I moved toward it, heart hammering, and found Tessa standing by the counter with her arms wrapped around herself. She was shaking, not dramatically, not sobbing, just trembling like her body had been cold for too long. "Tessa," I said softly, "are you okay?" She lifted her eyes to me and I saw the kind of fear that doesn't need explanation. Her pupils were wide. Her face looked drained, like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. "It's under the bedroom," she whispered. "What is?" I asked. "Movement," she said. "Not footsteps. Something shifting, dragging, like it's pushing on beams." I glanced at Grant. "Grant," I said louder. "Did you hear anything?" He didn't move. Then, without lifting his eyes, he mumbled, "It's not for us." The sentence slid into the room like a knife. My skin prickled. "What did you say?" Grant's mouth barely moved. "It's not for us," he repeated flat, like he was reading it off a cue card. Tessa made a small broken sound in her throat. "He's been saying that for 20 minutes, she whispered. He won't come with me to the bedroom. He won't even look at me." The radio on my belt hissed softly, even though I'd turned the volume down earlier. Not words, not static, just a thin sound like air moving through plastic tubing. I forced myself to focus on tasks because tasks keep you from drowning. "Where's the access panel?" I asked Tessa. She shook her head quickly. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't." Her eyes were begging me, and for a second I wanted to listen. I wanted to tell her to pack a bag and leave and let someone else handle whatever this was. But I also knew something. If I didn't look, I'd imagine worse. And in my experience, not looking doesn't stop anything. It just makes you vulnerable to surprise. So I moved toward the back bedroom. The bedroom door was slightly open. Inside, the room was colder than the rest of the cabin, as if the cold had chosen a specific place to live. A rug near the bed had been kicked aside. I knelt and found a thin wooden panel in the floor. Crawl space access. The panel was open about an inch. Dust and insulation fibers were disturbed around the seam like someone had recently pushed it. I swallowed hard and pulled the panel up. Cold air breathed out of the opening. I shone my flashlight down into the crawl space. 4 feet of clearance. Dirt floor, insulation hanging in pale strips, pipes overhead, standard under-cabin guts, except for one thing. A parka lay on the dirt floor, carefully arranged, fur-trimmed hood spread open like someone had laid it out to be seen. The same kind of parka from the cabin's 7 feed, and tucked under the collar, partially hidden but unmistakable in the beam of my flashlight, was a jawbone. Not buried, not discarded randomly. Placed, like an offering. My body reacted before my mind could translate. I jerked back so fast I banged my shoulder on the bed frame. The flashlight beam shook wildly. My stomach rolled. Behind me in the doorway, I heard Tessa inhale sharply, like she'd been waiting for the moment I confirmed her fear. The radio on my belt hissed again, louder. Then through the hiss, a voice whispered, low and even, like it was speaking into my ear from inside the radio's speaker. You turned it back on. My blood went ice cold. I didn't ask what it meant. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't argue with the logic of it. I didn't stand there trying to solve the mystery like a character in a movie. I stood up and walked straight out of the bedroom. Tessa was crying silently now, hands pressed to her mouth. Grant still hadn't moved, still staring at his phone like it was showing him instructions. Tessa, I said, voice firm in a way I didn't feel. You're going to pack a bag, right now. No questions. Shoes on, coat on. She nodded immediately. She didn't ask why. She didn't demand explanations. She moved like someone who was grateful to be told what to do. Grant, I said louder, we're leaving the cabin. Grant finally looked up. His eyes were blank in a way that made my stomach twist, like he was awake but not present. He blinked slowly and said, "It's not for us." I grabbed his arm, not hard, but enough to get his attention. His skin felt cold through his sleeve. "Grant," I said, "move." He stood as if someone had told him to. He didn't protest. He didn't ask where we were going. He just followed like the thought process had been removed. I walked them out to the utility cart and drove them to cabin 2, the one closest to the road. It was smaller, newer, and had better cell reception. Barely, but enough to matter. I turned the heat on full, handed them water from the office stash, and told Tessa to call the owner for a refund in the morning. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it because it wasn't their fault they rented a cabin with a taped breaker. Tessa looked at me with wet eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought I was losing my mind. "You're not," I said. "Your instincts did their job." I locked the cabin door behind them and drove back toward cabin 4 with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The whole way back, the fog seemed thicker. My headlights felt weaker. The trees looked closer. Cabin 4's porch light still glowed when I arrived, warm and inviting like a lie. I walked inside alone and went straight to the breaker closet. The tape was gone because I'd thrown it away earlier, but the idea of it was still there. I flipped every breaker off, lights, outlets, everything. I killed power to that cabin like I was cutting a fuse to a bomb. Then I left without looking back. At midnight, fireworks went off somewhere in the distance. I could hear faint pops, muffled by snow, like the world was trying to pretend everything was normal. In the office, the camera grid showed dark cabins and falling snow. Cabin 4's feed remained black. Cabin 7 remained empty. I sat with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, listening to the building's heater cycle on and off like a slow heartbeat. Every so often, I'd glance at the maintenance log app on my phone. It still tried to stamp everything as 11:56. I didn't log another thing. The next morning, the owner arrived around 9, cheerful in that fake business way. He asked how the night went. I kept my face neutral because I needed my job and because I didn't have the kind of proof that makes people listen. "Power issues," I said. "Probably a branch hit the line. I shut down cabin 4 as a precaution." He nodded like that was a normal sentence. "Makes sense," he said, making a note. "We'll take cabin 4 offline for renovations." Renovations. A clean word to cover something ugly. Tessa and Grant left early. They didn't call me. They didn't send a complaint. They didn't post a review. Maybe they wanted to forget. Maybe they didn't want to write it down where it could look back at them. As for me, I kept thinking about that tape, about how careful the wraps were, about how someone had taken time to hold a switch down as if they were restraining a living thing. Because after that night, I understood something that sounds simple but changes you when you really learn it. Some darkness isn't a lack of light. Some darkness is a door someone tried to keep closed. And on New Year's Eve, when I peeled that tape off and flipped the breaker back on, I wasn't fixing a flicker. I was answering a knock. The scariest part wasn't the footprints themselves. It was what they didn't have. No scuff marks where someone turned around. No trail drifting back toward the trees. No messy overlap from pacing or hesitating. Just a clean, slow line of prints coming out of the woods, crossing the deck and stopping perfectly at the welcome mat. Like whoever made them walked up to the house and decided they were done walking. Like they didn't need to leave the same way they came. I was 16 the winter my Aunt Denise left her ranch house empty for New Year's. She lived outside Millersburg in one of those long one-story places that looked harmless in daylight. Wide porch, low roofline, windows that faced open land. It felt like the kind of home you'd picture in a family photo album. Safe, practical, quiet. But quiet out there meant something different than quiet in town. Out there, quiet meant you could hear your own heartbeat when you stood still. It meant if someone whispered your name from the woods, you'd hear it clearly. It meant there were no neighbors close enough for your fear to bounce off and come back as something manageable. My cousin Luke and I had begged to stay there because my parents were hosting their usual New Year's Eve party. Loud, crowded adults getting sentimental and drunk and yelling over each other like noise could prove they were happy. Luke and I loved our families, but we were old enough to want space and young enough to think space couldn't bite. Aunt Denise was gone on a ski trip with friends. Her house was ours for a night, and that felt like a victory. Luke's mom dropped us off mid-afternoon, tires crunching on ice. Windshield wipers squeaking against flurries. Before she left, she ran through the standard list of rules, like she was reading from a parenting script. "Lock the doors," she said. "Don't mess with the fireplace vent. Don't touch the old circuit panel in the laundry room, and turn off the porch lights before bed." Luke nodded too enthusiastically, trying to look responsible. Then his mom paused. Her eyes flicked toward the tree line beyond the backyard, and her tone changed just slightly. "You're not in the suburbs out here," she said. "Lock up early." It should have landed heavier. It didn't. We were 16. We heard caution as background noise. We waved her off, watched her taillights disappear down the snowy road, and the second the house was ours. We did what teenagers do when adults are gone. We made it a movie night like that was a sacred ritual. We dumped our bags in the guest room, claimed the couch, and turned the living room into a nest. Snacks on the coffee table. Soda cans lined up like trophies. Luke connected his Bluetooth speaker and played a playlist of horror soundtrack music because he thought it was funny. It was dumb, but it worked. Those low violin drones and distant thumps made the house feel like a haunted theater. Around 7, we decided to make resolutions, mostly as a joke. Aunt Denise had this big glass jar on the kitchen counter full of folded slips of paper. Gratitude notes she wrote herself through the year. The kind of thing she did because she was trying to stay soft in a hard world. Luke grabbed sticky notes and a pen and said, "Let's make our own," like we were inventing a tradition. So we wrote the kind of goals teenagers write when they're half serious and half performing. Luke wrote, "Stop procrastinating." I wrote, "Be less angry for no reason." Luke wrote, Get a real job. I wrote, don't let fear decide things. Luke read mine and laughed. Fear? What are you, 80? I shrugged like I didn't care, but the words stuck to the inside of my mouth. I folded my note and dropped it into the jar with a tiny clink that sounded too loud in the kitchen. Outside, snow kept falling. The yard turned white and smooth like the world was erasing itself. The porch light glowed warm, casting a soft halo over the steps. By 10, we were deep into the horror marathon, mocking jump scares, throwing popcorn at the screen, pretending the night was nothing but entertainment. When the TV went to commercials, Luke flipped channels to find a New Year's countdown, then flipped back like it was embarrassing to care. It felt almost normal. That's how it starts, every time. Normal enough that your guard drops. Normal enough that you convince yourself warnings are for people who don't know how to relax. Around 11:30, I got up to use the bathroom and noticed two things at once. Two small, stupid things that shouldn't matter and somehow did. The fireplace vent was still open, and the back door wasn't locked. The fireplace wasn't a real wood-burning setup. It had one of those fake log inserts. Pretty, not practical. But the chimney vent still mattered because it was basically a metal throat leading straight outside. When it was open, cold air seeped in, and the screen in front of the fireplace would rattle now and then like something was tapping it from the inside. Earlier, we'd heard that rattle and joked it was the house breathing. Now I stared at the open vent handle and felt embarrassment burn in my chest. Luke's mom had literally warned us, lock up early, don't mess with the vent. I walked over and closed the vent, pulling the little metal handle until it clicked shut. The rattling stopped immediately. That silence, how fast it arrived, made the room feel heavier, like the house had been waiting for me to do that so it could hear something else. Then I headed toward the laundry room where the back door was. The back door had a small window in it that looked out onto the deck and the trees beyond. Aunt Denise kept a welcome mat there, and we'd been tracking snow in all night. I reached for the deadbolt, ready to slide it into place. And that's when I saw them. Footprints on the deck, not scattered, not messy. A slow line coming in from the tree line, crossing the boards and stopping at the back door. They were deep enough that someone had real weight. The edges were already crusting over slightly from cold, but the prints were fresh. You could see the tread pattern clearly. I leaned closer to the window, breath fogging the glass. My stomach dropped because there were no footprints going back, nothing leading away. Just that single line coming toward the door like a decision. I locked the deadbolt so fast my fingers slipped. Then I latched the chain. Then I stood there with my hand still on the lock, staring at the prints like if I stared hard enough I could force them to make sense. Luke called from the living room, voice casual. "You good?" I didn't answer right away. The house had suddenly become too quiet, like it was listening. I turned off the kitchen light instinctively, another stupid reflex. Then realized darkness wouldn't help, turned it back on, and finally called, "Luke, get in here." He groaned like I was interrupting something important, then wandered into the kitchen with a handful of caramel popcorn, chewing. "What?" he asked, still half amused. I pointed. He stepped closer to the window, popcorn pausing mid-chew. His face changed the way faces do when jokes hit a wall. "Okay," he said slowly. "That's weird." "Where's the rest?" I asked, and my voice came out thinner than I meant. "Where's the trail back?" Luke leaned down like he could inspect snow through glass. "Maybe it drifted over?" "No," I said. "Look, you can see the texture everywhere else. It's smooth." Luke stopped chewing. "Could be an animal," he offered, but it sounded like he didn't believe it. An animal with boots? I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. Fear makes you sharp. Luke swallowed and nodded. Yeah, he said. Right. We did the only thing we could think to do. We checked every lock. Front door bolted, windows latched, garage door closed. We walked room to room like we were playing a game where the prize was not dying. The house was empty, nothing was open, everything seemed fine, which somehow made it worse. Because if everything was locked, then the footprints weren't a warning about an unlocked door. They were a message about proximity. Luke tried to shake it off because that's his coping style. Talk until the fear gets bored. Maybe someone came up, knocked, realized nobody answered and left, he said. But why wouldn't they leave tracks? I asked. He didn't have an answer for that, so he shrugged and went back to the couch, turning the TV volume up like sound could push the woods away. I stayed in the kitchen longer, staring at the back door, staring at the prints, trying to force my breathing to stay normal. Then the fireplace screen rattled again. A gentle metal tremor, like someone nudging it. I froze. The vent was closed. I had closed it. That rattle should have stopped. Luke noticed my face and muted the TV. What? He asked, the humor gone now. The screen rattled again, slower, uneven, like whatever was making it wasn't testing the screen. It was learning how it moved. We both stood up at the same time and walked toward the fireplace. In the dim light, the faux logs looked harmless, like a staged photo. The metal screen in front of the hearth trembled gently, then stopped. Luke forced a laugh. Draft, he said, but his eyes were too wide. I stepped closer and saw something that hadn't been there earlier. Ash smudges on the brick. Not a lot, just faint streaks like dirty fingers had brushed upward. My mouth went dry. Luke, I said quietly. He followed my gaze and went still. The screen shifted again, then tipped forward and clattered onto the floor. Ash scattered across the rug. Luke jumped back and swore. I stumbled backward too, heart hammering. For a second, nothing happened. No hand came out, no animal, just a fireplace opening like a mouth. Then I saw something dark wedged behind the grate, partly buried in soot, a shape that didn't belong. I leaned in just enough to make it real. It was the heel of a boot, black, worn, caked with grime like it had been somewhere muddy and old before it ended up inside a clean suburban-style fireplace. I felt my entire body go cold. Luke whispered, "No, no way." "Get your phone," I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It sounded older. Luke grabbed his phone from the couch, fingers shaking. "Call my mom," he said. "I'm calling the sheriff," I replied. We moved toward the front door because leaving suddenly felt like the only sane move. We didn't even discuss it. We just acted. Luke snatched Aunt Denise's car keys from the bowl by the door. Neither of us had our licenses yet, but in that moment, a ticket felt like a gift compared to staying. I put my hand on the front doorknob and stopped. Because through the side window I saw the porch. More footprints, fresh ones. Deep, clear, coming from the woods to the front steps and once again stopping at the door. No return path. It was like whatever was out there had walked up to both entrances of the house and simply arrived. I jerked my hand away from the knob like it burned. "We're not going out there," I said, and the words were pure instinct. Luke's breathing quickened. "Then what do we do?" The answer came for us. From the kitchen behind us, the back door creaked. Not a full swing, just a few inches. A soft, deliberate opening sound. We turned in unison and my stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling. The back door was open, not wide, not dramatically, just cracked the way someone opens a door quietly when they don't want to announce themselves. I remembered the bolt sliding into place. I remembered the chain. There was no way I imagined it. We stood frozen for a half second that felt like a whole year. Then the floor creaked in the laundry room. Twice. Not settling wood, not random expansion, 2 slow, weighted steps. Luke grabbed the fireplace poker from the stand like he'd been waiting for an excuse to hold something that felt like control. I yanked the biggest kitchen knife from the drawer, not because I thought it would help, but because empty hands suddenly felt like surrender. We ran, not out of the house, into it. Down the hallway to Aunt Denise's bedroom because it was the only room with a solid lock. We slammed the door and turned the knob lock so hard it clicked twice. We pressed our backs against the door, breathing too loud, listening. The handle turned almost immediately. Slow, careful pressure like someone testing, not frantic, not angry, curious. Luke lifted the poker, knuckles white. I held the knife in front of me like I'd seen adults do in movies and hated myself for it. The handle stopped turning. Silence returned. No footsteps walking away, no retreat, no sound at all. That was worse than noise because it meant whoever was outside the door was still there or didn't need to walk. Luke whispered, "Call someone." My hands fumbled with my phone. I called Luke's mom first, straight to voicemail. I called my parents. No answer, probably loud party, probably music. I searched for the county sheriff's number because we were outside town limits, and I didn't even know if 911 would route correctly out here. My fingers shook so badly I hit the wrong digits twice. When someone finally picked up, I gave the address and tried to keep my voice steady. "There's someone in the house," I said. The dispatcher asked questions. "Where are you? Are you safe? Do you see them? Do you hear them?" "I hear them," I said. "They're at the door, please." "We have a unit nearby," she replied. "Stay where you are. Do not open the door for anyone until an officer identifies themselves." Luke and I sat on the floor, backs to the bed, still holding our pathetic weapons. The bedroom felt too bright because Aunt Denise had left a lamp on a timer, and the normal warm light made everything more surreal. Minutes crawled. At some point, the fireplace screen rattled again out in the living room, faint and distant like a reminder. Luke's eyes kept flicking to the closet like he expected something to emerge from there too. I tried to keep my voice calm. "We're okay," I whispered, not sure if I was talking to Luke or myself. "We're doing the right thing." Luke nodded too fast. Then finally red and blue lights flashed through the bedroom window. Relief hit me so hard I nearly cried. Luke let out a shaky breath that sounded like a laugh. A voice called from the hallway, "Sheriff's office." I didn't move until the voice repeated it. Then I stood, legs weak, and opened the bedroom door slowly. A uniformed deputy stood there with his flashlight raised. Another deputy was behind him, scanning corners, eyes sharp. They swept the house room by room with quick professional efficiency. No one was there. No open windows, no broken locks, no sign of forced entry. The back door was closed and locked when they checked it. The chain was in place. One deputy stood on the back deck, flashlight beam cutting across snow. "Footprints," he said, and then his voice shifted. "That's odd." I stepped to the window and looked. The inbound trail was still there, but the snow had started to fill in the edges, softening them, erasing detail like the night was cleaning up after itself. And still no trail away. The deputy glanced at Luke and me, then at the fireplace. "You said you saw something in there?" We led him to the hearth. The screen lay on the rug where it had fallen. Ash was scattered. The deputy crouched and shone his light behind the grate. There was nothing. No boot heel. No object. Just soot and old brick. Luke's face went pale. "It was right there," he insisted, voice cracking. "I saw it. We both saw it." The deputy didn't accuse us of lying. That would have been easier. Instead, he looked at us with the kind of expression adults get when they don't have a box for what you're telling them. "We didn't find anyone," he said carefully, "but you did the right thing calling." He told us to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and call again if anything happened. Then they left, their lights fading down the driveway like a promise that didn't fully settle my nerves. Luke and I didn't go back to the couch. We stayed in Aunt Denise's bedroom until dawn, sitting on the floor, phones in our hands, listening to every creak like it might be a step. In the morning, sunlight made the world look harmless again. The snow glittered. The trees stood still. The footprints were half filled now, barely visible, like the night had tried to apologize by hiding its own evidence. Luke and I cleaned up quietly. We didn't talk much. There are experiences that make you feel older without giving you anything useful in return. When Aunt Denise came back weeks later and heard we'd called the sheriff, she didn't ask a lot of questions. She just went quiet. Her eyes lingered on the back deck longer than they should have, and she nodded like some part of her already knew. That summer, she sold the house. She told the family it was because she wanted to be closer to town, easier drive, better access to stores, less maintenance. Nobody argued. Nobody pushed. Luke and I never brought it up again, not even to each other, because saying it out loud felt like reopening a door we'd barely managed to keep shut. But it changed me. It taught me that the most dangerous moments aren't always loud. Sometimes they're polite. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they're just footprints arriving at your welcome mat like an appointment. And it taught me something else too, something I actually hold on to in a good way, because you need something good after a night like that. When fear shows up, you don't have to be brave in the way movies teach you. You don't have to investigate. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to protect the people you're with, trust what you saw, and choose life, even if it means leaving a story unfinished. Because some things don't need you to open the door, they just need you to forget to lock it. By the time Jules invited me to her family's hunting cabin for New Year's, I had developed a weird relationship with quiet. Most people crave it. They pay money for it. They drive hours to find a place where their phone doesn't buzz and their thoughts can finally stretch out. I used to be like that. But after a few winters of nights that didn't behave the way nights are supposed to behave, silence stopped feeling like peace. It started feeling like an open door. One you didn't notice was cracked until you felt a draft move through the room. Jules texted me on December 28th. "We're doing a small reset. No party, just the cabin, soup, and a real midnight where we actually mean what we say." She was my cousin on my mom's side, older than me by a couple years, the kind of person who could talk about gratitude without sounding like she was performing it. She'd had a rough year. Breakup, job stress, the kind of steady pressure that doesn't explode but slowly hollows you out. She wanted a weekend that felt like exhaling. The cabin was in northern Pennsylvania, deep enough into the woods that even rural felt like a generous label. It was a hunting cabin in the truest sense. Small, slanted roof, mudroom full of old boots, walls that smelled faintly like smoke and oiled metal. It had been in her family forever. Deer season, weekend repairs, occasional summer fishing trips, that kind of place. The plan, Jules said, was simple. 4 of us, Jules, me, Micah, and Bennett, plus her dog Ranger. Micah was a friend of hers from college, male, quiet, observant, and the kind of guy who always seemed like he'd notice something before you did. Bennett was her co-worker, male, louder, funnier, a little too confident sometimes, but in a way that usually made stressful situations feel lighter. Ranger was a black and white mutt with a cloudy eye that made him look like he was staring through you instead of at you. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't a barker. He was just watchful in the way dogs get when they've learned the world has corners humans don't see. We arrived on the afternoon of December 30th, the sky already fading into that winter gray that makes everything feel earlier than it is. The road in was a narrow dirt strip turned into hard snowpack. Trees crowded close. The cabin appeared suddenly, like it had been waiting. Inside it was cold but not unwelcoming. Jules started the wood stove and the warmth crawled out slowly, inch by inch, like the cabin had to be convinced to trust us. We unpacked groceries, soup ingredients, bread, marshmallows, coffee, and tried to settle into the fantasy of a quiet weekend. Jules had brought magazines and a pair of scissors for something she called a low-pressure vision board. It sounded corny, but she explained it in a way that didn't feel fake. "Not goals," she said, spreading magazines across the table. "Just reminders, things you want your nervous system to believe again." Micah nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. Bennett made a joke about cutting out pictures of yachts and abs, and Jules threw a marshmallow at him. We spent an hour flipping through pages, cutting out words and images that felt like small promises. Steady, home, breathe, start over. Jules taped a picture of a sunrise to her page like she was trying to convince herself she'd see one. I tried to play along. I wanted to. But I kept noticing the quiet in the corners of the cabin, the way the walls absorbed sound too well, the way the stove popped and creaked like a living thing shifting. Ranger paced while we worked. Not frantic, just a slow circuit from the fireplace to the front door and back again, nails ticking against the wood floorboards in a steady rhythm. "New place," Bennett said. "He's just checking it out." Jules smiled but watched Ranger longer than she needed to, like she was listening to something behind his behavior. By 10, snow had started falling again, slow and lazy, thick flakes drifting like they weren't in a hurry. The windows blurred. The world outside became a snow globe someone had forgotten to shake. We ate soup, drank a little, and tried to make the night feel intentional. Around 10:30, Jules suggested a midnight gratitude toast. "Not the fake kind," she said, "just one thing, something real, something you're proud you survived." Bennett rolled his eyes but softened when he smiled. "Fine," he said. "I'm grateful I'm not at a party pretending I like people." Micah said quiet, "I'm grateful for second chances." Jules looked at me. I hesitated, then said the first honest thing that came out. "I'm grateful for my instincts, even when they make me look dramatic." Jules nodded like she understood more than I wanted to explain. Ranger stopped pacing and froze at the front door. His tail dropped, his shoulders locked. He didn't bark. He just stared at the wood like it had moved. The room went still around him. "Ranger?" Jules called softly, patting her thigh. He didn't look at her. Then he growled. It wasn't loud. It was low and constant, vibrating in his chest like he was trying not to make noise but couldn't stop his body from warning us. Bennett shifted uneasily. "Okay," he said, trying to laugh. "That's creepy on purpose." Micah leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Do you hear something?" he asked. We all went quiet. At first, all I heard was the stove crackling and the faint wind. Then barely I heard something else. A soft tap that could have been snow sliding off the roof. 2 taps, not on the roof, on the back door. The back door was in the kitchen, opening straight into the woods. No deck, no steps, just a door that, if you opened it from, would put you in untouched snow and black trees. We all looked at each other, that silent moment where your brain tries to decide if you should laugh or get up. Jules forced a chuckle that didn't reach her eyes. "Bennett," she said, half teasing, "if you're messing with us..." "It's not me," Bennett replied too quickly. Ranger's growl deepened. Micah stood, grabbing a flashlight from the counter. "I'll check," he said. Jules started to protest, but Bennett was already standing too. Like being upright gave him authority over fear. So we all went to the kitchen, moving in a tight group like we were trying not to separate. Micah flicked the outside floodlight switch. Yellow light spilled across the snow behind the cabin. Nothing. No figure. No movement. No animal tracks. The snow back there was smooth as paper, untouched. Even the wind hadn't patterned it yet. That's what made my stomach tighten, the perfection of it. The way the light hit a surface so clean it felt staged. Micah opened the back door just a crack, keeping the chain latched. Cold air slid in, sharp and dry. He shone the flashlight beam across the snow anyway, sweeping left to right. Still nothing. He closed the door and locked it again, slower this time, as if he wanted the door to understand he was serious. We stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say, because maybe it was a bird didn't fit, and neither did anything else. Eventually, Bennett clapped his hands like a coach. "All right," he said loud. "We're not letting a mystery knock ruin the vibe. Back to the plan." We went back to the living room and turned the TV on low for background noise, trying to reinflate normal like a balloon with a leak. But Ranger didn't go back to pacing. He sat facing the front door, body tense, eyes fixed, as if he'd decided the real threat wasn't behind us anymore. At 11:42, the power went out. No flicker, no warning, full stop. The lamp died, the TV cut. The heater fan went silent. Even the little digital clock on the microwave blinked off and stayed off. The cabin didn't just get dark. It got quiet in a way that felt intentional. Like the silence had been waiting for the electricity to leave so it could fill the room completely. Jules grabbed a hand-crank lantern from her bag, one of those emergency ones she kept because she was that kind of prepared. She cranked it hard, and a weak white light bloomed steady but not strong enough to feel comforting. My phone flashlight turned on, but its beam only reached a few feet. Bennett tried the light switch twice, like force might make the power behave. "Okay," he muttered, the bravado thinning. "That's not ideal." Micah went to the breaker panel by the mudroom. He opened it and flicked switches. Nothing changed. "The fuse box is outside," Jules said quietly. None of us moved. Because stepping outside into a snow-filled darkness after unexplained knocks is the kind of decision you make only if you don't have instincts, or if you don't care whether you come back in. Ranger's ears perked. The front door handle moved. We all saw it. A slow, deliberate turn, not yanked, not frantic. Just pressure applied like someone testing if the lock was still the lock. Jules inhaled sharply. Bennett swore under his breath. Micah raised the lantern, light trembling. The handle turned again, slightly farther, then stopped. Ranger barked once, sharp, angry, then went back to that low growl that sounded like a motor idling. Bennett took one step toward the door, then stopped like his own body didn't trust him. "Who is it?" he called, voice higher than he meant. No answer. just the sound of wind and the stove crackling like it was trying to pretend this was normal. Minutes crawled. The handle didn't move again. No knock came. But the feeling didn't leave. The cabin felt watched, not from one direction, but from everywhere the darkness touched. At 11:54, we heard a knock again. This time it came from above us, from the ceiling. One heavy thump over the living room, followed by a smaller tap, like something had shifted and settled. Jules stared upward, her face draining. "No," she whispered. "What?" Bennett asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "The attic," Jules said. "No one's been up there in years. It's just insulation and traps. The hatch is in the hallway." Micah didn't argue. He grabbed the fireplace poker with one hand and the lantern with the other. "Show me," he said. We moved into the hallway. The attic hatch was a small square panel in the ceiling with a pull string. Micah positioned the ladder under it, climbing slowly, poker tucked awkwardly under his arm. The ladder creaked with each step, a loud complaint in the quiet. He pushed the hatch up. Dust fell like gray snow. The lantern light caught the inside of the attic. Dark beams, insulation, nothing obvious. Micah swept the lantern beam around carefully. "No one," he said, but his voice sounded wrong, like he was trying to convince himself more than us. Then he paused. "The dust," he said. Jules stepped closer. "What about it?" Micah pointed at the edge of the hatch. Earlier it had been coated in a thick, undisturbed layer of dust. Now a wide arc of it was wiped clean, as if something had pushed the hatch open from the inside, something broad enough to smear it in one smooth motion. I felt my stomach turn cold. Micah climbed down, closing the hatch carefully, like he didn't want to anger it by slamming it. Nobody joked after that. We dragged the couch closer to the fireplace, forming a stupid little barrier that made us feel less exposed. Jules cranked the lantern again until her arm shook. Bennett sat with his back to the wall, clutching the poker like it was a lifeline. Micah held the lantern in both hands, eyes flicking between doors. Ranger lay under the coffee table, head low, eyes still fixed on the front door. Midnight came without celebration. No countdown, no Happy New Year, no cheers. Just 4 people sitting in a cabin with the power out, listening to the stove and the wind, waiting for the next sound that would prove we weren't alone. Then the bang hit, a single heavy slam against the outside wall, hard enough that the cabin shuddered. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Jules gasped. Bennett flinched so hard he nearly dropped the poker. Ranger exploded into barking, furious, frantic, but even he didn't rush toward the sound. He barked from under the table like his body knew the safest position was still hiding. A long scraping sound followed, slow and deliberate, like something dragging itself around the exterior of the cabin. It moved steadily from one corner toward the back, tracing the foundation with sound. You could track it with your ears. You could imagine it with your mind, and imagining it was almost worse than hearing it. Bennett whispered, "What do we do?" Micah didn't answer right away. He just listened, jaw tight. Jules' voice trembled but stayed firm. "We stay together," she said. "We don't open anything." The scraping continued. Then abruptly it stopped. Silence fell so hard it felt like it pressed on our chests. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was impatience. Maybe it was the part of my brain that hates uncertainty more than fear. Maybe it was that thin American optimism that tells you if you just look, you'll understand. Micah and I crept to the kitchen window, moving low. The lantern stayed behind with Jules and Bennett to keep some light in the living room. My phone flashlight was useless against the glass glare, so we turned it off and peered out into the night. Moonlight and faint lantern spill gave us just enough to see the yard. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw the line. A long trench carved through the snow, perfectly straight, running from the woods all the way to the cabin, not footprints, not tracks. A single dragged groove like something had been pulled or had pulled itself without lifting its body. At the end of that trench, right where it met the foundation, was a perfect circle, not deep, but clean. A ring pressed into the snow as if something had stood there perfectly still, weight distributed evenly, not shifting, not pacing. And there was no trail away from it, no trench leaving, no footprints, nothing. Just that one path and that circle at the house like a stamp. Micah's breath fogged the glass. "No," he whispered. Behind us, Jules said, "What do you see?" I turned, heart hammering. "We're leaving," I said, and my voice came out sharper than I intended because fear had finally made a decision for us and my job was to agree with it. Bennett didn't argue, Jules didn't argue, we didn't pack, we didn't tidy, we didn't even put on proper layers. We grabbed keys, phones, and whatever coats were closest. Micah opened the front door. Cold air poured in like water. The porch was empty. No footprints, no figure, no sign of anything. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. It felt like a trap, like whatever made the trench didn't need to stand on the porch to be there. We ran to the car anyway, boots slipping in snow, breath tearing in our lungs. Ranger bounded with us, barking once and then going silent as if he didn't want to give our position away. The car started on the first try, which felt like a miracle. Bennett cranked the heat full blast. Jules slammed the locks down. We drove just far enough down the road to put space between us and the cabin, then stopped where the trees thinned slightly and the view behind us was open. We sat in the car with the engine running, heat slowly returning to our fingers, and watched the cabin's outline through falling snow. It was dark, quiet, still, like nothing had happened. That's what horror does sometimes. It leaves no mess. It gives you no evidence to carry to the people who want tidy explanations. When dawn finally came, gray light spreading through the trees, we drove back cautiously. Jules said she needed to see it in daylight, like seeing it would prove we hadn't made it up together. The trench was still there, softer around the edges now, filling in slightly but unmistakable. A straight line from the woods to the foundation. The circle at the end still pressed cleanly as if the night had signed its name and didn't care who read it. Jules stood in the snow with her arms wrapped around herself. Bennett stared at the mark like he wanted to argue with it. Micah walked the edge of the trench without stepping into it, careful like he didn't want to disturb something that might wake back up. Ranger sniffed the air and whined softly, tail low, refusing to go closer. Jules turned to us and I saw something in her face that was both fear and relief. Relief that she wasn't crazy, that her desire for a quiet reset hadn't been weakness, just hope. "I'm selling it," she said. Bennett blinked. "It's your family's cabin," he protested, like history should outweigh danger. Jules nodded once. "I know," she said, "but I'm not handing this down to anyone, not as a tradition, not as a story we joke about later." Micah didn't argue. He just nodded like he respected the decision for what it was. A boundary. We left within the hour. No pictures, no nostalgia, no lingering. Jules sold the cabin that spring. She didn't tell extended family the full reason. She said she wanted to simplify her life. She said she didn't hunt. She said the upkeep was too much. All true in a way. After that, our group drifted. Not because we hated each other, because sometimes shared fear creates a knot, and you either untie it together or you avoid it entirely. Jules and I still talk. Bennett moved away for work. Micah and I exchanged the occasional check-in, the kind that doesn't mention the cabin but carries the weight of it anyway. And me? Now every New Year's I stay somewhere loud. Not because I need distraction, because I understand something I didn't understand when I was younger. Light and sound and people aren't just celebration. They're protection. They're proof you're not alone. They're a chorus that makes it harder for something quiet to speak back. I still believe in fresh starts. I still believe in gratitude. I still believe in the idea of stepping into a new year with intention. But I don't believe in inviting silence just to prove you can handle it. Some things love a quiet cabin in the woods. Some things arrive when you finally stop talking. Some things don't chase you or break in or smash windows. They just come up to the house, leave a mark that says I was here, and wait for you to decide whether you're going to treat that as a warning or a tradition. That New Year's Eve, we chose warning. And I'm still here to tell you about it because of that choice.